Right now is the time of a gold rush in Star Citizen. An actual, legitimate gold rush, not involving bugs or item duplication, but a humble gameplay loop turned to the max. You might be forgiven for thinking, oh, new patch, it must be the whole sea being broken to drive sales. Well, the whole sea is currently kind of broken, but not in a good way. No, instead this is all about grabbing cargo from salvage contracts. I'm Forrester, and this gameplay video shows an example of some of that gameplay, stuffing the M2 Hercules full of goodies found around the verse, as well as showcasing a classic Star Citizen example of a blunder. Much of the footage has been sped up to keep the overall length down, and those parts have been clearly marked as such, but there's much cargo salvaging to be done, so let's get started. And our playthrough starts by retrieving the M2 Hercules, which will be our chariot for today. The M2 has plenty of cargo storage, not quite so much as the C2 Hercules, but for a ship that I actually own, that's quite helpful. The next step will be to pick a salvage contract. As we make our way to the ship, I'm just using some of the slow time while in an elevator just to do a little bit of pre-sanitization on the list of contracts. There's a varying degree of different cargo contracts of different size of ship. Initially, I think I'll start with the biggest contracts that are fairly nearby, so think Hercules size, they tend to carry more cargo. In this case there's an A2, and there's an A2 at her L2, which is fairly nearby. Now the A2 models don't carry quite so much cargo as the M2 or the C2. That said, as an initial drop, it's certainly worth a look. Hop into the cockpit of the almost airline style Hercules there, and start plotting our route to her L2, where the first salvage claim is. So essentially the name of the game here is you take the salvage contract, you head to it in a ship that probably isn't a salvage ship, and then you load up the cargo from it to sell it for more than you paid for the cargo contract. Fairly simple idea. So at this point I'm going to speed up the footage because you've probably seen plenty of quantum travel in your time if you're watching this video. You will notice on the way into the salvage claim here I am ducking and diving in between the asteroids. Sometimes it's a little bit easier if you continue to rotate the ship, just makes the asteroids a little bit more visible, so that's why that wasn't quite as smooth, just to keep it safe. And here we have the A2, which is the salvage contract. To make loading and unloading much easier from the M2, I'll try and go nose to rear, so bring the nose of this Hercules M2 as close as possible to the rear of that A2, and then open both sets of doors, and in theory, if you get it right, you should be able to stand at your own cargo bay and tractor everything from the next cargo bay without ever having to set foot off the ship. Doesn't always work out like that. Inevitably, you don't want to get too close to the target ship because that's a recipe for suddenly it's in a spin and trying to retrieve everything gets messy. But if you get it right, it does speed things up. Quickly jumped into the inventory there. That was just to make sure that my character was indeed wearing a space helmet. It's definitely advised if you're leaving the ship in zero gravity to wear a helmet. Slowly make our way down the ladder of the M2. And I already opened the doors as we approached. I have a handy keybind on my throttle, which just lets me quickly open and close the doors. So we'll open the doors on the A2 and have a look inside at what's on offer. This sort of gameplay almost reminds me of, if anyone's ever seen those TV shows where people buy like an abandoned storage container and then have to figure out what's inside it after they've bought it. This is a bit like that. Now, some of you that have been making a lot of money from this gameplay loop will have seen me chuck that maize off the side of the ship and be going, what? Whoa, 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 that was a huge container of maize. That's where the big money is. And you're sort of right, but regular viewers of the channel will also know that I'm a very legal, legitimate gameplay sort of person, and so we've thrown those illicit goods off to one side so we don't have to consider them. However, that big container of Quantanium, yes please, nom nom nom. Now, I've seen a lot of people that are really wanting to make the most possible per hour. They'll take, well, many will take those illicit, illegal cargo drugs and what have you, not me, but equally many will then also take the high value cargo like the Quantanium and leave the rest and just move on. I'm going to take everything, partly because I'm not taking the illicit cargoes, so I'd rather have a little bit more in the cargo bay, but also I just think a good full cargo bay looks good. And I can never remember if it's 2 high or 3 high or however high the M2 is, so I was trying to just see if that box would fit on top of the other box. Turns out the answer is no. So part of the fun, if that's the right word, of this kind of gameplay loop for me is the enjoyment of stacking the boxes yourselves. You get to choose what goes where. Now there is definitely an optimum way to stack the boxes, because when you go to sell the goods, sometimes the cargo grid can't quite figure out what goes where, so if you try to sell something that's on top of another thing and they're all mixed in, it seems to get a bit confused sometimes. So it certainly wouldn't hurt to have the same sort of goods stacked together if you were looking to get the maximum sale. I don't know if I've explained that very well, but you can let me know in the video comments if you understand what I'm talking about. Or equally, you can let me know in the video comments if you've got no idea what I'm talking about. Here's the Quantanium. This is the good stuff. A bit of boraes. This is not the good stuff, but it is stuff. It'll sell. I'm not going to complain at having stuff to sell. At this point I'm just going to hop aboard the A2 and just double check that all the stuff I've thrown to the end here is stuff that I don't want. A lot of the illegally type stuff does have a different look to the box, to the crate. And I really like now, you can see as you tractor beam the box, underneath the box there's like a green word which says what's in it, so I know that this crate is Quantanium. This is a really nice quality of life change, especially for those of us that want to try and stay within the realms of what is legal in UEE space. So that's all of the cargo from that A2. What I'm going to do now is just try and stack it somewhat neatly. Ultimately, there's a little bit of a balancing act between taking the larger crates and the smaller ones that can fill the spaces. And the other thing I just want to check is that we're flush to the back of the ship there, and we are, so that's good. So I'm just going to dump these 1 SCU crates just in the middle here for now, because there'll be more as we go around and make our way through other areas. There will be more crates, and so I'll need to reorganize those small 1 SCU crates anyway, so just leave them in the middle, that's fine. So despite having done absolutely zero salvage of the ship, I've got the cargo from it, so we'll make our way to our next destination. Incidentally, if you do read the contract on these salvage contracts, this isn't like a breach of contract or anything like that. You buy the salvage claim, and then you are free to do whatever you want with it, and the contract even says, once you're done, just abandon the contract for no penalty. So that's what we've done. So, I've taken a contract for a constellation, but there's an M2 nearby, so we'll take that as well. I say nearby, it's on the opposite side of Hurston, which is probably a little bit awkward to get to, but we'll make our way there now. Turns out nothing is awkward to get to if you do it in ×12 speed, so this is some sped up footage of just hopping around Hurston, making our way to the next salvage claim. As you can see, the same idea, get nice and close in behind. This is looking very efficient at ×12 speed. And then move the crates from one ship to the other ship, organise them, juggle them around. Wow, this is a lot in ×12 speed. Once again, as before, the illicit and illegal drugs I'm not going to keep hold of, I'm just going to dump them off the side. I'm really sorry to all of you that are offended by that loss of potential cash, but doing it this way, like, you make so much money, especially from the Quantanium. So that's that next salvage contract cleared. So taking the next one, which is an A2 at Michael 1, also had a contract here for a constellation at Michael 1, so we'll make our way back. There we are, nice and close in. Move some boxes across. The other good thing about doing this through a big ship with a cargo grid like the Hercules is that you do get an element of 30k protection from it as well. So whilst you are paying out for these contracts to be able to find the salvage ships, you do get the protection of knowing that if something goes wrong, you'll get your ship back with all that cargo on it. And on the way to the next salvage contract, I came across, this is something that salvagers will be used to, it's a big group of salvage ships. In this case, it's a big group of vultures. For some reason, sometimes the way that these things spawn in, they're like all spawn in a big clump. And in this case, there is a big clump of drake vultures. Now, they don't have particularly large cargo bays, but they do have cargo bays. And there's a group of terrapins over there in the same vein. So my thought here is, I'm paying for all these contracts for the Hercs, which is fine. But actually, if there's a big group of vultures here, they don't have as much cargo in the back, but they all potentially have some cargo in. So, given that there is a large number of them, this is a free score. That's the thought process anyway. So looking here at these vultures, I can kind of see one of them has been salvaged by a player. And what I mean by salvaged is like proper whole salvage with a vulture or reclaimer. The rest are all pristine, and critically, they all have their doors shut, which says to me they've not been looted yet, and so represent an opportunity to reappropriate some of the cargo they're in.
Engines off. Engines on.
The engines off is just my usual if I'm going zero gravity, but the ship was still drifting slightly after I pressed the button slightly too soon, so switch them back on, let the ship steady itself, and then engines off. Make our way down to the base level of the Herc. Now I'm parked a bit further away here, just because I don't know what the right distance is from a vulture. So, like I said before, the last thing you want to do is bump accidentally. So this is the salvaged one, so just going to have a quick check and see is the cargo aboard, and yes it is. So, given that we have got cargo, I think it is safe to assume that there's cargo on each of these little vultures, and it's like copper. It's not particularly valuable until you multiply it by the number of crates that are on board these ships, and then suddenly something that wasn't particularly valuable in itself becomes very valuable in high quantity. And to understand that, just look at the example of the cargo traders. They make margin by buying low, selling high, but they invest heavily in the cargo on board. You could be spending, for some of the ships, you could be spending hundreds of thousands of Alpha UEC to fill them up. This is the same, but without the hundreds of thousands of Alpha UEC required to spend to fill them up, because, well, it's here, right in front of our eyes. Now, of course, if you are looking to min-max with your time, focusing on the high-value stuff, the quantanium or the illicit goods, that's the way to go. So the true gold rush is in focusing your time, really grabbing only the high-value stuff, then moving straight on, getting it all sold for big chunks. That said, there's something in me, a little magpie in me, that doesn't want to leave all these nice shiny cargo boxes just floating in space, so I'm grabbing them anyway. Incidentally, I did talk in the introduction about the Hull C, and I was thinking I'd do a Hull C cargo hauling video for this Let's Play. But number one, this is a good opportunity to actually showcase making some serious money in Star Citizen, which I don't often get to showcase. But also, number two, the Hull C is not working as intended. And I've gone from having 2-3 million Alpha UEC at the start of this week to having like just a few 100,000 because of problems and bugs and challenges. And yeah, I didn't want to go through that on a Let's Play video, so instead you've got some sped up footage here of salvaging some crates and boxes from some random ships that I found in the verse. I suppose that's the true emergent gameplay. Right? And this is where the size of the Hercules really starts to become obvious, because you're loading all this stuff in and it's like barely taking up some room at the back of the ship. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. And there's so many vultures here. Like, they don't have a huge amount of cargo storage in them. I think probably in terms of boxes for a full Vulture here, you're getting 12 SCU. So it's slow, it's tedious, and it's not a lot of cargo to fill things up. But because there's more than one Vulture, actually it's just a case of flying out, flying around, grabbing a box, grabbing the next box, and you're away. And then get them all neatly organised at the back of the ship. Everybody's happy. And then I've slowed down the footage here because this is a typical Star Citizen experience as I'm pushing my box of tungsten back towards the ship and my character dies. I'd love it if anyone can explain to me why this happened. I had full health, full food, full water, full oxygen. Don't think I got crushed by the box, just character died. So at this point, thankfully, my med center was set to New Babbage and we weren't too far from New Babbage, so I'm able to grab the fastest ship I could find, in this case the Origin 350R, hop inside, speed off into the sky, and this is a ship, thankfully, that speed is the appropriate word to use. Head over to Mike L1, through a quantum drive which is not so much speedy, but thankfully it's not a long hop. And this is one of the advantages of, like, I was in the middle of nowhere salvaging those vultures, but because I get that little marker that says this is where your corpse was, I'm able to get back to the ship which is carrying all that valuable cargo. There it is. Poor little floating Forester. So, head out, grab the stuff, and we'll continue. Unfortunately, I can't actually see the little tractor beam multi-tool, and this presents a challenge. Because I needed that. That would have been rather useful. So instead, I'm going to have to just make do with what we have. Look for the button to close the back door. It's on the other side. Doors are shut. I'm completely comfortable to leave that Origin 350R right there. It's not a ship that I use very often, and when I do, it tends to be to go and find another ship quickly. And so the fact that we've been in an unfortunate accident that wasn't our fault, and the fact that we no longer have a multi-tool, that's saying to me, it's probably time to go and sell up.
Crusader Industries, a journey worth taking. Systems on.
So we'll set a route for Microtech. Don't be surprised if, particularly for the high value stuff like the Quantanium, you're not able to sell everything all at once, all in one go. There are a lot of people doing this at the moment, and so it's one of the rare times where I've seen Quantanium having no demand in some of the major TDD centres. It's very strange to see, but clearly there's so much Quantanium being found and sold, there are lots of players doing this that is a thing. So if you do run into that you're going to sell up and there's no demand, I would just either hold on to the cargo or maybe try hopping to a different server region, just see if there's the option to sell there. And I think some landing zones are more popular than others, so I'm heading to Microtech. I think that's a fairly popular landing zone. ArcCorp tends to be a little bit less popular, and sometimes Orison as well, although the Jump Town event at the moment might be changing that. So you could try hopping to a different server or hopping to a different landing zone, or you could just hold on to it and wait for another time to sell. So here we go, we've got a nice big landing bay here for the M2. That's always nice to get. I do find in Star Citizen the air traffic control will either give you a landing bay that is really generously sized for your ship, as in this case, or they'll give you a landing bay which your ship technically fits in, but is going to be a bit of a piloting challenge for you as you go in. So I'm grateful when you've got a cargo hold full of stuff that they give you the slightly bigger bay and say, hey, you can be let off this time. Need to leave the ship, so I'm going to call the elevator. I think I've talked it before when I've been using my Hercules around when I use the elevator versus the ladder. I do think that ladder is really handy from going from deck to deck because you don't have that wait time for the elevator. But obviously when you're wanting to leave the ship, the elevator is one of the better ways to do that. And I know there will be some of you as well thinking, I've left the elevator down. Please don't worry. I'm less concerned about that in like a big landing bay like this because there tend not to be people hanging around waiting in these. Even if somebody saw me come in, they'd have to like find the appropriate hangar. Look at that new Babbage Interstellar Spaceport. That's wonky. I saw a glitched in orbit tweet and I can't unsee that now every time I see it. Terrible. But yeah, I'm not so worried about leaving the elevator down because I'm about to store the ship, and I think the chances of somebody making it in and then making off with the ship before I get the chance to store it are low. So I've taken that risk. And I said I'm going to store the ship, and so by way of evidence I've stored the ship. Cargo is theoretically safe. So now it's just a case of heading down to sell up. Now this whole playthrough was a little bit longer than expected. I thought, I'll do about an hour showcasing this. It ended up being an hour and a half, but by and large that was due to a couple of factors. I think the first was the untimely demise of the character, which wasted a little bit of time. And the second was just finding all of those Drake Vultures. It wasn't the most efficient use of time. If you were going for maximum Alpha UEC per hour, you'd focus on just the biggest cargo hauls and the biggest ticket items on them. But what can I say? I'm a fan of the variety of cargo out there. So as we made our way down to the Microtech tram, which is bobbling up and down a little bit, I'll speed up the tram ride for you so you don't have to watch that all the way through. A ×12 visit through New Babbage, and we're here at the Commons. I like coming up through this part of the Commons and hearing that. They've obviously got a voice of somebody to try and do an almost David Attenborough style, I don't know how to describe it, but like that documentary style British voice as we're talking about all of the animals and all of the environment. You know, that sort of style. There are people that can do a good impression of that. I'm not one of them, but hopefully that serves to explain what I was talking about. I really like that when I'm coming up. It's like a little parody. And here we are, ready to sell up. So there you'll see 27 SCU of Quantanium. That's quite valuable, but not able to sell that. So I'll just do some server hopping and then I'll be able to sell it. Here, you do get that sometimes. Cargo removal failed, which is just indicative of, like, I think I've just not been able to figure out the cargo grid. So sometimes when you've got things mixed in, that does happen. But if you're concerned about it, you can just, I don't know, you can load your cargo in such a way that the same sort of thing is together and it'll figure it out. Because that's essentially what it does when you buy and sell cargo as a trader. It loads it in a way that makes sense, whereas give players a tractor beam and suddenly they're not necessarily loading it in a way that makes sense. As is our right. So, sold a fair bit of cargo there. We've still got the Quantanium to sell. That's the really valuable stuff. So I'll do some server hopping to sell that. But that, broadly speaking, is the Gold Rush gameplay. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Something a little bit different. Look forward to reading your thoughts in the video comments. If you liked it, please do press that like button. It helps YouTube know to show you more like this. And equally, if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, you might like to do that too to see more such videos in future. Otherwise, and as always, thank you for watching.